The year was 1415, and an African empire was about to change the world. Imagine standing on the shores of the Indian Ocean, watching massive wooden vessels prepare for departure. These weren't European ships, they were Chinese, and the man commanding them was not a European explorer. He was Zheng He, a Muslim admiral from the Ming dynasty. But this is an African history documentary. So why are we talking about China? Because what happened next fundamentally altered the course of African destiny. Before 1415, African kingdoms were thriving centers of commerce, scholarship, and power. The Mali Empire had dominated West Africa for centuries. The kingdom of Kush had rivaled Egypt itself. The Great Zimbabwe was an architectural marvel that stood as tall and proud as any structure in the medieval world. Yet somehow, in our school textbooks, African history often begins with European arrival. That's where you come in. You need to know the truth. Zheng He's voyages lasted from 1405 to 1433, and his fleets reached the East African coast multiple times. These expeditions brought African kingdoms into direct contact with global maritime trade networks. Places like Mombasa, Kilwa, and Zanzibar flourished because of these connections. African merchants, African rulers, and African civilizations were active players on the world stage centuries before the Atlantic slave trade began. This is crucial because it establishes something fundamental. Africa wasn't waiting to be discovered. Africa was discovering itself. Now fast forward to 1652. The Dutch East India Company established a small settlement at the Cape of Good Hope. It seemed insignificant at the time, just a refreshment station for ships traveling to Asia. But this moment planted the seed for something devastating. This settlement would grow into the Cape Colony, which would eventually become the foundation for South African apartheid. For 3.5 centuries, this single decision would cause immeasurable suffering. One small settlement, centuries of consequences. But let's not focus only on tragedy. Let's talk about resistance and brilliance. In 1818, something extraordinary happened in what we now call South Africa. A young warrior named Shaka transformed the Zulu kingdom into a military powerhouse. Shaka didn't just lead battles, he revolutionized warfare itself. He developed new tactics, new weapons, and new organizational strategies that made the Zulu kingdom a force that European colonizers couldn't easily crush. By 1828, when Shaka died, he had created an empire that earned the respect and fear of every surrounding kingdom. This wasn't a kingdom that fell immediately to colonial powers. This was a kingdom that fought back. Across the continent, similar stories unfolded. In 1896, the Ethiopian Emperor Menelik II faced Italian invasion at the Battle of Adwa. He didn't just win, he humiliated the Italian army so thoroughly that Italy had to recognize Ethiopian independence. Ethiopia remained uncolonized while nearly every other African nation fell under European rule. Imagine that. While the scramble for Africa was carving up the continent, one African nation said no. One African empire stood firm. That matters. And what about intellectual achievement? The University of Timbuktu, established in the 12th century, was producing scholars centuries before Oxford and Cambridge reached their prominence. African mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers were advancing human knowledge, while Europe was still emerging from the medieval period. The Songhai Empire, at its height in the 16th century under Askia Muhammad, was a center of Islamic learning and trade that rivaled anything the world had to offer. Here's what this African history test is really asking you. Will you accept the complete narrative or settle for fragments? Will you acknowledge that Africa has always been more than a victim of history? Will you recognize that African people built empires, developed technologies, created art, established universities, and shaped global commerce long before anyone,